Federal officials are seeking to pull in the virtual reins on the internet, hoping here for new online regulations that will make for easier wiretaps. Officials say their ability to eavesdrop on suspects is being compromised by the growing tendency to communicate electronically instead of picking up a phone. The Obama administration is now planning to submit a bill next year calling for all communication services, including your BlackBerry, Skype, and even Facebook, to be technically able to comply with wiretap orders. But what does that mean for the web as we know it? NBC News Chief Justice correspondent Pete Williams joins me now from D.C. And I guess, Pete, the first question might be, what is the problem that this is aimed to solve here?
Okay, here's the problem. In the old days, in the 1930s or 40s, if the FBI wanted to listen in on some organized crime figure's call, they'd go down to the central office and they'd find the pair of copper wires that came from that guy's house and wound its way downtown, and they'd take some alligator clips and clip onto his line and listen to it. Then when the telephone companies went to electronic switching, Congress passed a bill in the 1990s that said you still have to give the FBI and other law enforcement agencies the ability to listen in, because nowadays every time you pick up the phone, it could be routed to the central office in a dozen different ways. So that problem was more or less solved, and now the new one, people using Skype to communicate by voice or voice over internet protocol, companies like Vonage, or entirely texting in ways that completely bypass the telephone company. Not just email, but things like BlackBerry devices that don't use the telephone company at all. So the problem is these companies say they're willing to help. This is when law enforcement knocks at the door and says, look, we have a judge's order. A judge has said we can wiretap this person's communications. Give us that tap. The company often says, well, we'd like to help, but frankly, we don't know how to do that. So this is a bill that would require any communications provider to have the ability to give that access to law enforcement. Now, it's one thing to just listen in. It's another thing to decode communications that are often decrypted, that are encoded. So the companies would also have to figure out some way to decode these messages so that the FBI can monitor them when they have a judge's order allowing them to do it.
So that might concern some in terms of privacy, and I want to go to an FBI official and what he said to the New York Times. He said, quote, "We're talking about lawfully authorized intercepts here. We're not talking expanding authority. We're talking about preserving our ability to execute our existing authority in order to protect the public safety and national security." But, you know, in order to accomplish this, when we're thinking of this issue, that goal here, don't you have to change some of the fundamental structures of the way the Internet is working right now?
Well, I think the FBI, and remember, this is not just an FBI issue. This is a big deal for local law enforcement, too, because well over half of the wiretaps in America every year are done at the local level. This is people looking for kidnappers and bank robbers and people who are extorting money, all the usual crimes for which you could get a wiretap. And what they say is that, no, the fundamental structure of the Internet wouldn't change, but some would argue that there's a reason people go to these different areas for communication because they do want to bypass the phone company. And of course, some people who do that also do it because they want to evade detection. And what the law enforcement community is worried about is, do you really want to have safe havens where people can plot crimes, potentially even terror attacks, and the government would never know it?
The early issues on this debate. NBC's Pete Williams, thank you.
You bet.